arson, robbery, and assault. These were the horrific sights many Los Angeles residents watched as a mob of thousands turned their beloved city into ruins. Chaos and anarchy consumed the city as the rampage led to thousands of buildings being destroyed and people being severely injured as the untamed crowd threatened the city with violence and no law enforcement in sight. One community took matters into their own hands and fought back with lethal force, turning Koreatown into a war zone whose makeshift soldiers became an icon of bravery and solidarity.
Number 3, man, we're above the location right now. We got many officers and many people running.
There's a riot situation in the area. Advise units not to respond.
Known as the Korean Rooftop Warriors. Los Angeles, the city of angels, was a place where fame, high-end fashion, a luxurious lifestyle, and prosperous living were ripe for the taking, attracting millions of people from all over the globe. From the iconic Walk of Fame to the dreamlike coast of Long Beach, Los Angeles was seen as a place where dreams came true. During the 1990s, Los Angeles was dazzling in an era of unparalleled glamour. It was a time when the City of Angels truly lived up to its name, basking in the radiant glow of the entertainment industry, with Hollywood at its peak, churning out iconic films and TV shows that captured the world's imagination while featuring iconic celebrities that made people obsessed with their very existence. Meanwhile, the city's sports scene was equally electric, with the Lakers dominating the basketball courts and the Dodgers thrilling fans at Chavez Ravine.
There's so much here. There's so much to see and do, and
exciting vibrations.
The weather, it's the sport, it's the people.
So much to see. Every place you look, there's just something different.
Businesses were booming and reaching new heights in LA, from the inception of tech giants like Google to the rise of fashion houses such as Guess and Fubu. The sky was the limit for those who dared to dream. For residents, it was a never-ending paradise, where they admired the beauty of Rodeo Drive, which dazzled with luxury boutiques, while being entranced with the Sunset Strip, which was pulsating with music. Los Angeles was a city of boundless possibilities, where dreams could come true under the warm Californian sun. As the city thrived in its glitz and glamour, this provoked many foreigners to migrate and settle down, causing a mass uptick in the immigrant population of Los Angeles. Many owned successful businesses in different neighborhoods. As foreigners were subjected to poverty, dictatorship, and unemployment in their home countries, they saw America as a land of opportunity that would help them break free from the shackles of cruelty. But soon, those who sought refuge were going to find out that the City of Angels was full of unforgiving demons that were looming to crush their hopes and dreams. Of the individuals who immigrated to Los Angeles, 300,000 were Korean, those of whom began creating businesses in the city after fleeing their home country due to its failing economy. However, they didn't receive the warm welcome they were anticipating. Since many immigrants didn't have enough cash to set up shop in elite districts, they were given the opportunity to settle in predominantly black neighborhoods. Those parts of the city had relatively cheaper real estate due to the area's high crime rate and lack of business competition. But the Koreans were seen as invaders by the people who lived in those areas for generations, and the difference in culture only made them resent each other even more. As time went on, the hatred of both groups grew tenfold. The Korean shopkeepers suspected that their black customers were shoplifting and robbing, while the people from the black neighborhood were angry with the Koreans for humiliating and disrespecting them each time they stepped into their stores. Both sides hated each other to the point that innocent lives were being lost. With little to no intervention by the local authorities, the violence became the norm. But it seemed like the new Korean residents weren't the only dilemma that the black communities had to face, as the Los Angeles Police Department was heavily criticized by community leaders for their excessive use of force on minorities. LA had a growing problem with police brutality. This became apparent during the implementation of Operation Hammer, in which the LAPD started to cleanse the streets of Los Angeles for the 1984 Olympic Games. As the operation went on under the direction of Daryl Gates, areas of South Central and East Los Angeles were targeted. The police started mass arrests of people from those communities with the approval from Daryl Gates, they used excessive force while detaining them. This led to the people filing complaints about unnecessary police force in those areas, but their cries were left unheard. By 1990, nearly 50,000 people were arrested during similar raids like Operation Hammer, among whom the majority were minority males. This led to critics calling out the LAPD for being racially motivated, but no action was taken against the LAPD or the department's policies. The perceived injustice done by the LAPD made the minorities lose their trust in the system, forcing them to take matters into their own hands, leading to many more situations of violence between the Korean and Black communities. The less the local authorities interfered, the more intense the conflict between the two sides became. But little did the local authorities know that the accumulated hatred of the minorities was soon going to lead to devastating consequences for the entire city. The Black communities had lost all hope in the LAPD, as people from their neighborhoods died from gang violence and drug overdoses on a weekly basis. But the lack of intervention of local authorities during the conflicts with the Koreans intensified the tension even more, creating a breaking point that was going to come sooner than anyone could have anticipated. On March 3, 1991, Rodney King and two passengers were driving on the Foothill Freeway in the San Fernando Valley. King was intoxicated while behind the wheel. Due to this, the California Highway Patrol attempted to initiate a traffic stop, but in a state of panic, King accelerated his vehicle and a high-speed chase ensued. Both King and the patrol officers' vehicles reached high speeds of 115 miles per hour. The high-speed chase lasted for a couple of minutes, and after passing through multiple neighborhoods, King finally stopped his vehicle in front of the Hanson Dam Recreation Center. From that moment, King's car was surrounded by CHP officers, who began to call the LAPD for backup. The officers ordered King and his fellow passengers to step out of the vehicle. The two passengers were handcuffed and placed inside the patrol car, while King suffered a fate far worse than he could imagine. The LAPD officers tased King and began beating him with their batons. After tackling him to the ground, they continued King's senseless torture by kicking and stomping him while he was down until he lost consciousness. After the brutality was over, the officers handcuffed King and hog-tied his legs. But luckily for King, the incident was recorded by a local bystander, George Holliday, who witnessed the incident from his apartment and decided to record the whole thing on his camcorder. Soon after, the news about the recorded assault spread like wildfire, with dozens of news channels reporting on the incident and making headlines in their articles. After news about the incident became public, people took to the streets and began protesting against brutality by the LAPD officers, demanding justice for King. Weeks after the incident occurred, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office charged the 4 police officers with assault and use of excessive force. And later, a court date was announced for April 22, 1992. The LAPD's brutality was well known among minorities, but the recording of Rodney King made the violence mainstream. As the brutality of Rodney King began to spread nationwide, many people took to the streets and started protesting against the unjust brutality of King and demanding a fair trial. As hundreds of people gathered on the streets of Los Angeles demanding justice, the trial had everyone's attention. And with the tensions rising among minorities, this case was going to decide the fate of LA. The moment the world had been waiting for finally arrived. On April 22, 1992, the trial of the 4 officers began, and due to the severity of the incident, every resident in LA had their eyes on the trial, the majority of whom were people from the Black community who were rooting for the culprit's demise and justice for King. As the days went by more and more, people began rallying outside the courthouse, demanding a guilty verdict for the officers and a change in the LAPD's police brutality culture. But many protesters were left disappointed, as on the 7th day of the trial, all 4 officers were acquitted of their crimes. This verdict served as the final nail in the coffin for those who felt oppressed and were living on edge. At around 3:45 p.m., a group of 300 people gathered outside the Simi Valley Courthouse and collectively opposed the jury's verdict. The protest was peaceful at first, but in other parts of the city, civil unrest was beginning to ensue. At around 4:15 p.m., tensions started to rise in LA as people with ill intentions started to commit crimes in their neighborhoods. But this was only foreshadowing the chaos that was yet to ensue. At 4:58 p.m. during a news conference, the mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, expressed his anger towards the jury's verdict, highlighting the fact that the recorded video of King's assault is solid proof of the heinous crimes the officers had committed and that the public should not accept the jury's decision. Many people took the mayor's statement to heart, provoking them to join the protest and the growing number of participants to the thousands. Meanwhile, at Florence and Halldale, things were escalating quickly. A 16-year-old boy, Sindel Daniels, threw objects at a police patrol vehicle that was cruising in the neighborhood. The car was dented from the front, and the cops initiated and arrested a teenager. Now the teen was well known in the neighborhood, so people from the neighborhood came to his defense and began calling the officers out for using unnecessary force on the teen. As the crowd grew even more, the officers called in for backup, after which approximately 24 officers arrived on scene, and upon their arrival, the crowd became hostile and started to get closer to the patrol cars. The officers attempted to deter the crowd by waving their batons, but the crowd stood unfazed by their threat. Soon, the officers started making multiple arrests, only to be outnumbered by the people of the neighborhood, forcing them to retreat back to their headquarters before things turned violent. After the officers fled the scene, the agitated crowd began moving south, towards the intersection of Florence and Normandy. The number of rioters grew by the hundreds, and many used the excuse of King's assault to commit crimes against the public and the whole neighborhood.
That's not right! That's not right! That's not right what y'all doing!
As the hostile crowd marched towards the intersection, they began throwing objects towards moving vehicles and assaulting anyone who wasn't an African American. Live coverage was being made by news helicopters that recorded the chaos that erupted on the streets of LA. Violent instances occurred where people were being pulled out of their vehicles and brutally assaulted by members of the crowd. From 6:43 to 7:40 p.m., innocent civilians were being victims of the vicious crowd, as truck drivers who were present at the intersection were dragged out of their vehicles and were being beaten senselessly until they lost consciousness. Many kind-hearted people from the crowd broke off the fights and carried the injured civilians to safety, yet that wasn't enough to stop the crowd from burning and looting local businesses. Even before the riot started happening at the intersection, Chief Gates was notified about the hostile crowd by officers that retreated back to the headquarters, but Gates instructed all officers to stay put and observe the action of the rioters. Around 8:30 p.m., the police force finally entered the intersection, but it was far too late, as the mob had already dispersed in the other neighborhoods and shopping centers, leaving the police with no one to apprehend. While the police were aimlessly searching for culprits to arrest at the intersection of Florence and Normandy, the riots in downtown Los Angeles were getting worse by the minute, as multiple attempts were being made by anarchists to burn the Parker Center and kill any officer that left the building. The city that was meant to be a dream come true became a living nightmare where rioters robbed stores, assaulted innocent civilians, and burned everything to the ground. As the nightmare continued, places like downtown LA were closed off in order to contain the riots, but that wasn't enough to prevent more riots from breaking out in other neighborhoods. No one was safe during the riots. Even the firefighters that were busy extinguishing flames of burning buildings were shot at by members of the crowd. As the city turned into ruins, the mayor of Los Angeles requested Governor Pete Wilson to deploy the California National Guard. But while the California National Guard was on their way to assist the LAPD, one community was not going to wait for a rescue and decided to fend off evil themselves with bullets and white headbands. On April 30th, 1992, the mayor of California declared a state of emergency and implemented a dusk till dawn curfew for the areas affected by the riots. But even with the curfews in place, violence began to erupt and looting of local businesses started once again. This time, the rioters were moving towards the north side of central Los Angeles, which threatened all the wealthy neighborhoods that were situated in the region. The LAPD were outnumbered by the growing number of the crowd, so Chief Gates ordered his officers to form a barricade and defense line around wealthy neighborhoods like Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, and Robinson Boulevard, protecting the elites from the fires of chaos while leaving the poor and unfortunate to burn. The LAPD's barricade blocked off low-income neighborhoods from accessing the wealthy areas, abandoning them in a chaotic hellscape. Among the low-income neighborhoods was Koreatown, whose residents could see the threat coming towards them from a mile away. But this neighborhood was not going to fall victim to the riots that easily. One employee of a local gun store, David Zhu, received a call from his employer, Richard Park, who requested backup as rioters were breaking into one of his stores. Zhu rushed towards Park's shop and fended off the crowd with his handgun. Zhu and Park fired warning shots at the rioters who threatened their stores. Local store owners realized that the LAPD officers were not going to come to their rescue and would let Koreatown be consumed by the riots, due to which the Koreatown residents began taking up arms to defend themselves and stood on the roof of their stores. Many people within the community had prior military experience from South Korea, and today their skills are going to be put to the test. Store owners stood on the roof of their buildings and began firing warning shots at the rioters. After seeing that the number of rioters was more than they could handle, store owners began calling the local Korean radio station and told them to put out a call for backup to defend the stores in Koreatown. After radio broadcasts were made to the public, dozens of armed Koreans came to support their fellow community members. Things continued to escalate even more as rioters started fighting back against the Koreans. Store owners who were armed with weapons included the M1 carbines, Ruger Mini 14s, pump-action shotguns, and handguns engaged in a shootout with a band of armed looters whose numbers kept increasing by the minute. But with determination to protect what was rightfully theirs, the Koreans stood their ground and forced the rioters to surrender. And as time went on, many more Koreans joined the fight. The rooftops gave the Koreans a strategic advantage over the rioters, as they could easily aim and take cover from enemy gunfire. The sight of Koreans fending off rioters became an example of unity and strength for the American population, which led to the public labeling the defenders as Rooftop Koreans. The battle for Koreatown was over, and the Koreans won their neighborhood back, but at the cost of their community members, among whom was an 18-year-old boy, Edward Song Lee, who lost his life while protecting his community. As the dust settled, it was revealed that about 2,300 Korean-owned stores in Southern California were looted or burned. And out of the $850 million worth of damage done in Los Angeles, half of them were from Korean-owned businesses. Even though they won the battle, the Koreans did not rest until the National Guard was deployed in Los Angeles and the riots were officially over on May 3rd.
People confirmed dead at this time, at least 572 injured, including 2 firefighters.
We lost trust in America.
I mean, can people realize what they're doing is wrong? This is not the way to overcome racism.
This is not fair! This is not fair!
After the riot stopped, it was estimated that a total of 63 people had lost their lives. Miraculously, no law enforcement official died during the riot, probably because half of them arrived late to the riots. Along with that, 2,383 people were reportedly severely injured. As for the city itself, Los Angeles suffered severe damages that accumulated a cost of $1 billion. According to the damage report, approximately 3,600 fires were set that led to the destruction of 1,100 buildings. On May 5th, Mayor Bradley lifted the curfew, announcing the official end of the riot. Although in some areas, incidents of minor violence and crimes continue for a few more days, but they were timely handled by law enforcement agencies. Some National Guard soldiers remained as late as May 27 as a precautionary measure to prevent any further riots from breaking out. Meanwhile, Daryl Gates was heavily criticized by the public due to his inability to reduce the tension of the riots and his overall poor management of the whole situation. After being blamed for the loss of life and the damages caused to the city, Gates was forced to resign on June 28, 1992. As for the Koreans, they wanted their voices to be heard. So a week after the riots had concluded, the community held one of the largest Asian American protests ever seen in the city. Approximately 30,000 people participated in the protests. But unlike the violent riots, their aim was to promote peace and condemn acts of violence against minorities, along with safeguarding the political rights, cultural heritage, and political inclusion of Koreans. It seemed like justice was going to be served after all for King, as the public pressured the court to take a retrial of the officers. As the first anniversary of the trial came closer, the public's anticipation of the jury's decision grew even more. The decision was read in a court session on Saturday, April 17, 1993 at 7 a.m. in which it was stated that Officer Lawrence Powell and Sergeant Stacy Kuhn were found guilty, while Officers Theodore Brissino and Timothy Wien were acquitted of their crimes. The decision was better than nothing, and the public's response was fairly positive. The officers who were acquitted were forced to quit the LAPD. On the other hand, Rodney King was awarded $3.8 million in damages from the city of Los Angeles. After deep diving into the history of the 1992 LA riots, we wonder how things would have turned out if Daryl Gates wasn't the chief of police. And as the city of Los Angeles changed for minorities since the riots,